So when we look at this idea of why bureaucracy has grown, there's some conflicting messages out there, and we want to kind of reconcile them a little bit. You always hear certain segments of our political debate centering on how so many people work for the government. The bureaucracy is getting larger and larger and larger, and that's like very popular rhetoric. There's some truth to that, and there's some distruth to that. So there's about 2.5 million people that work for the United States government. That doesn't mean they're working in Washington, D.C. They work in McKinney at the Social Security office. They work in Denton for FEMA. They work in Frisco at the post office. So they're all over the country, some doing very cool high-level Secret Service FBI kind of stuff, and some people doing very, basic working for national parks. So it's kind of all over the place. The President and Congress obviously get a lot more attention, but certainly the bureaucracy has a lot more focus on our everyday lives. So the bureaucracy was actually pretty small early in our history, and then it spiked significantly in the 1930s. What happened in the 1930s? Great Depression. And then it grew, kind of leveled off, and we haven't seen a lot of significant change back since then. So let's try to remember why. Okay? Great Depression. Why did the federal bureaucracy grow so significantly during the Great Depression? The New Deal. Do you guys recognize all this? I remember the alphabet soup. I remember walking into your U.S. history classes sometimes and hearing you having to memorize all of these. The Civilian Conservation Corps, the National Recovery Act. Our federal government grew exponentially during that time period. Well, every time you create some kind of government program, then you had to create an agency. And that was when we created so many federal government programs because of the economic troubles that we were in. Another time that we saw significant growth of the federal government was this time. My favorite president, right? Who is that? It looks like Reagan, but it's not Reagan. Who would have been president during LBJ? Okay, so remember, he was president during Vietnam, but we had the war on poverty. So we had significant spending on education, significant spending on Medicare as we created that program. That was when the Civil Rights Movement happened, remember? So we had to create, when the Civil Rights Act was passed and the Voting Rights Act was passed, we created all of these federal agencies that would oversee and make sure that we were actually implementing those, so we were making sure that minorities were getting to vote. We created all of these programs to combat poverty in the South, but we also were terribly involved in Vietnam. So there was just tons of spending happening everywhere during that time period. So here's the fact. If you look at that graph, the percentage of people that work for the federal government has not changed significantly since the late 1960s. But that's deceiving. Many people work for private companies that are hired by the federal government. So for example, a lot of you guys had Miss Decker last year, right? We'll pick up there after lunch.